Well, UFC 202 ended up being a memorable night here in Las Vegas at the T-Mobile Arena when we witnessed what could be one of the funnest rematches of all time with Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor. I am joined, of course, here by Kacper Rosolowski from Submission Radio, the main man, and my special partner, and the first time ever, and this is a very special moment because this man has been with us in the pub, on the shuffleboard, and now he's on Submission Radio. Simon Head. Simon, it's great to have you here with us on this post-fight breakdown show. We're going to kick it off by talking about this crazy McGregor fight. Kacper, we were talking to some media members before. You mentioned, to you, it was a very, very, very memorable fight. Would you say it's the best rematch that you've seen when it comes to the sport of MMA?
I think that's pretty grand, but I guess in one of the most recent fights, it's probably one of the better ones. Just as far as story, as far as magnitude, you saw the massive lead up with the bottle throwing incident. You saw the open workouts. Conor McGregor replicating Tupac. All these crazy things. The fact that McGregor seemingly, in my opinion, couldn't win this rematch. You see him overcoming a lot of odds in this rematch, overcoming the tiredness, really rallying. There's a lot of story behind here. Nate Diaz dominating early on, Conor dominating early on, Nate Diaz getting in the middle, and then Conor coming back to win. Yeah, it's probably one of the best ones.
It was an interesting situation because the crowd was sort of all over the place. Simon, there was some boos, there was some cheers. First, they were sort of booing Nate Diaz. Then you had some USA chants. Then they were cheering Nate Diaz. You had that ole, 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 ole going on there. How did you gauge the crowd for a Conor McGregor fight tonight? Did it match up to the other ones that you've sort of witnessed?
I think it was a different dynamic because I think it was a much more even split between McGregor and Diaz. Normally, I've been to UFC 189. That place was absolutely crawling with Irish fans. Whether they were all from Ireland, I'm not so sure. I think there were a lot of American fans who just picked up an Irish flag and thought they'd join in. That was incredible. 194 was the same. 196 was quite big. This one, I think it was a lot more even. Obviously, Stockton's finest, Nate Diaz getting involved. It's not that much of a trip to get the fans from Stockton, California over to Las Vegas. It's a much more expensive trip for those Irish fans who've had to do it a few times now. So all kudos and credit to those guys for making that trip over, probably for some of them the fourth or fifth time. So the actual atmosphere in the arena I thought was outstanding. You had that real big fight feel, and there were Irish journalists who have been there and followed the Conor McGregor journey all the way who were commenting on they'd never experienced an atmosphere quite like it was tonight. So it was a special one for sure.
Well, you're a man of many hats. One of them is reporting about the soccer, or football as it's known in your nation. I don't want to offend anyone, Simon. Did you feel like you were sort of in a soccer crowd sometimes? Were you hearing the ole, 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 ole? Did you get that feeling, that vibration through the arena?
Probably less in the arena, but a lot more so in the weigh-ins, because you had this situation in the weigh-ins. The room that we were in was like an aircraft hangar. That's how I described it in my report. And you had all these pockets of fans. There was a huge pocket of McGregor fans. You had these pockets of Diaz fans. And I've been in football stadiums before where we've seen and experienced crowd trouble. And there was that real electricity in the air. I was concerned because the security in the building was not very... it wasn't very evident. And the ones that were there were all like retirement age old ladies and stuff. So if anything had kicked off, we would have been right in the thick of it. But all credit to the fans. They behaved themselves impeccably, mostly. I think the worst that happened was they got drunk. But, I mean, who doesn't do that every now and again, right? So atmosphere was outstanding. The crowd delivered. The atmosphere delivered on fight night. And the two guys in the main event turned in one of the great rematches.
Well, let's talk about the fight for a second, because it was a very interesting moment where Conor McGregor was announced as the winner. I was watching it up in the press row, and to me it looked like Nate Diaz had won that fight. But, Kacper, I want to go to you. People still debating this, not sure who won. When you watch that fight, in your mind, who do you think walked away as the real winner tonight? Do you agree with this McGregor decision, or to you, King of Stockton, Nate Diaz, did he win it?
When I watched the first fight at UFC 196, I initially thought that Conor McGregor had an extremely dominant first round. When I later watched the replay, I didn't think so. I thought it was much more even. When I watched this fight initially, I thought that Nate Diaz actually won the fight. I thought that the first round clearly went to McGregor. The third one definitely went to Nate Diaz. I gave Conor the fourth, and I gave Nate the fifth. the story here is, how do you score the second round? Conor McGregor dropped Nate Diaz twice at the start, and then Nate Diaz really came back and had Conor on the ropes at the end and had a lot of volume in there. The question is, do you value knockdowns more, or do you value volume more? And it wasn't just volume from Diaz; it was damage as well. So I did feel like Nate Diaz won the fight, especially the way he finished that 5th round and really stole that fight with, or round at least, with that takedown. I felt that Diaz won the fight personally. I'm not saying that confidently. I'm going to rewatch the fight, and either way, whether you're a McGregor fan or a Diaz fan, I don't think you can say it was a robbery. It was a very, very, very close and a phenomenally entertaining fight.
First fight was a decisive victory for Nate Diaz. This one, McGregor wins it. Simon, where did Nate go wrong here? What did he do that you believe changed the outcome of this fight? What could he have done differently to be the winner yet again?
I think it was a tricky one. I think we saw Conor McGregor came in a lot better prepared. He knew what he needed to do. He started hitting Nate with leg kicks, which I thought was the key tactic that he needed to do. Nate leans very heavily on that front leg. He leans on it, he sways at the hips, but all his punch power comes from his front leg. And Conor was whacking that front leg with leg kicks throughout the whole of the fight, and that really did help sap some of Diaz's punch power, which was in the end a difference maker in the first fight. I know he won via submission, but it was that slick 1-2 combo, solid 1-2 combo that he landed on a tiring McGregor that really did the job. So McGregor was better conditioned for the weight. He came in very strong at the weight. It wasn't a case of preparing as a 155er and then just leaving extra weight on. This time he knew he was going to be competing at 170. He trained accordingly, and he won the fight that way. From Nate Diaz's perspective, I think he could have pushed the pace a little bit more. I think he was playing it a bit safe in the first couple of rounds, thinking I'll get him as the fight goes on. And what you found is, when the fight was at range and at distance, McGregor was winning those exchanges quite convincingly. His striking was on point. He looked outstanding. When the fight was up close in the clinch and up against the cage, that's where Diaz really shone. And when he was leaning McGregor up against the cage rather, he was sapping McGregor's energy. And those were the rounds that Diaz started to have real success in. And for whatever reason, he just wasn't able to keep that going. And he couldn't get McGregor to the mat. You know, by the time he got to the final round, and he pretty much, even though he says he thought he won the fight, the way he fought that last round tells me he clearly needed a finish. And he was relentlessly pursuing the takedown. The fact he couldn't get the takedown throughout 5 rounds against a guy who supposedly isn't that strong against wrestlers. So if Nate Diaz, admittedly not a wrestler, not quite good enough to get McGregor to the mat, in the end, that maybe was his best route to victory gone at that point. So McGregor in the stand-up chewed him up through most of the fight, and because he was better conditioned, stronger at the weight. That fight, the best chance for Diaz was for the fight to be on the floor, and it never went there.
I gotta say, there were some other interesting things that made this fight so compelling. One of it was that it really did sort of come in waves. You had McGregor dominant at the start, then he sort of dipped, and it looked like he was in trouble. It looked like he was gassed. Around the 3rd round, you looked like, oh my God, this is going to be history repeating itself. And then somehow, miraculously, I don't know how he did it, but he came back, and he didn't just come back, but he came back very strong. The leg kicks, that was another surprising thing. We spoke about, upsets this year in 2016, where Michael Bisping, in theory, had almost no clear path to victory, and in theory, shouldn't have won that fight. Other upsets like Tyron Woodley and Misha Tate and Amanda Nunes, and the list goes on and on. Of all the possibilities for Conor McGregor to win, you thought, well, if he's going to win, it's probably going to be a knockout. And that's a big if. If Diaz is going to win, it could be a finish or it could be a decision. I definitely didn't expect Conor McGregor to win by decision. I think most of the pros, the pundits, the people betting, I think that was one of the last sort of outcomes they expected. So, regardless of whether you think, Diaz won or McGregor won, you got to respect both gentlemen and give both guys a lot of credit. And I give McGregor a phenomenal amount of credit for weathering the storm, in a lot of ways doing what Diaz does best, which is weathering the storm and, staying out there to the end, which proves a lot, because we've never seen McGregor in a long fight, and today he showed that he's extremely tough and he can come back.
Well, it showed us that MMA is a very unpredictable sport. Yet again, we're surprised. We didn't expect it, and it happened. UFC 205, Simon. Now, a lot of people are talking about McGregor coming back for this fight. I believe Aldo even called him out and wanted to fight him at the big card in New York. And we know that Ronda Rousey at the moment's not looking very likely. Chris Weidman will probably be on the card, but he's not the draw that he was when he was the champion. So you need something big. So presumably the UFC want him on there. But we just saw McGregor was on crutches as he was in the press conference. Damon Martin pointed out on Twitter that he believes it's too soon. Do you think there's enough time for McGregor to recover and be ready for a fight at UFC 205?
I think it all depends on the extent of the injury. If it's just a little bit of bone bruising, it's just a case of resting. Whereas if he's actually, if there's any kind of micro fractures or anything like that, then he'll need extended time off. He won't be allowed to have any contact in training and all that sort of stuff. So it really does depend on what the doctor's report says. In terms of his training regimen, he could easily be back in time if he's fit to train. So, and that Eddie Alvarez fight, I think, is the one that needs to be made right now. The natural thing for him is to drop down to 155 and do that. So, I know Aldo is the big conversation right now. I honestly don't think he fights at 145 pounds again.
So what happens to the title? He's the featherweight champion. Let's say he does take this fight with Eddie.
Yep.
What would be the right move for the UFC to make if he does choose that fight?
Well, Jose Aldo holds the interim title. You put the full championship on him, but you give him a fight straight away. So whether it's another rematch with Frankie Edgar, whether you give Max Holloway a shot, or whether you bump someone else up the ladder, I think Max Holloway deserves a go. I think if you want to put a new name in there, so I mean, Frankie for me has always been, up until recently, the best guy in the UFC without a belt. But Jose Aldo is his kryptonite. I don't think he's got the game to beat Jose Aldo. He can beat almost anybody else, and I would have loved to have seen Frankie Edgar against Conor McGregor. That for me would have been a dream fight. I don't think we're ever going to get to see that fight now, which is a shame. But for Jose, I think Max Holloway versus Jose Aldo would be a great fight. I don't necessarily think it's a main event fight. I think it'd be a nice co-main, maybe just below Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez. Who knows? But I think Aldo's the next best guy. He's a champion. So if you take McGregor out of the division, McGregor can't really talk about that division anymore because he's not in it. So it's who's the best in that weight class. Number one, if McGregor's not there, it's Jose Aldo. So give him the full title and then get that division moving again, because it was kind of weird today. Conor was talking about, it's not going to be good for the division if they give the undisputed title to a guy who last fought and lost for 13 seconds against McGregor. Well, is that not any better than the champion not ever defending his belt and just walking around and the division being stagnant and then you having to put an interim belt in there? I think what you need to do, get the undisputed title back in play, and you want active fighters defending the title and competing for the title. Jose Aldo is the guy right now, and then it's a case of who's next for Jose. For me, I'd make it Max Holloway.
And just to add to that, I think as far as McGregor goes, he spoke at the post-fight press conference just before how he doesn't really get excited for that fight. I think it's a little bit of a mixture of a few things. I don't think it's just the fact that he doesn't get excited. I think it's also Conor McGregor being the businessman. He doesn't think it might be as big of a draw. I mean, you saw the 194 lead up, and I think it was 189 when they were originally supposed to fight. How do you top that? All the embeddeds, all the world tours. And I think being a businessman, Conor McGregor realizes it's not going to happen, and there are bigger fights. I don't think it's really got anything to do with motivation. In saying that, if he does go back, and I think that if he's going to continue being the featherweight champion, he definitely needs to go back to 145, and that's a big if. If not, they need to strip him. I'm still in some ways intrigued by the Aldo-McGregor fight. I feel like the first fight, fair play to McGregor, he definitely beat him fair and square, but there's a lot of unanswered questions. The leg kicks, how are they going to affect him? We don't know. The punching exchanges, the grappling, there's a lot of things I feel that are unanswered. If they do fight again, it's still a fight that I'd be interested in. Just, I don't know as far as the lead-up. But in saying that, the lead-up to this fight, a lot of people criticised it, including ourselves, and they turned it up right in the last week. So I think if anyone can sort of formulate a game plan, not so much for the fight, but for the lead-up, and to make money out of it, I think McGregor can.
It looks like both men are looking for a trilogy fight. Your thoughts on that? The second one was a classic. The first one, decisive to Nate Diaz. How soon would it be acceptable to you to see a third fight between Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor?
Acceptable? Well, that depends on who you're asking, the UFC or the fans or the media. I'm sure the UFC would love to do it straight away. I don't want to see this fight anytime soon, to be honest. We've just had two. It's great. It's time for something fresh. I mean, I know there's been a tremendous build-up and a lead-up to it. You and me, we're not biggest fans of rematches. I like to see other. I don't like to see titles be too stagnant. Like you could potentially give Conor McGregor a title fight, like you mentioned, Simon. And if you don't do that, what else are you going to do? So yeah,
Simon, it's an interesting situation. You mentioned he may give up his championship belt. Jose may be champion. He versus Eddie. Do you think if he goes to 155, that's a permanent home for Conor McGregor for the future?
I think so. I think that's his optimum weight. I think at 145 he's a bit tight at the weight now. I think we've seen at 170, he's a bit small. Against Nate, he did okay. Nate is a lightweight and a big lightweight. So anything, can you imagine McGregor in there with a Robbie Lawler or a Tyron Woodley or a Wonderboy Thompson? Stylistically, Wonderboy Thompson Conor would be amazing, but Wonderboy is so much bigger. So I think the natural home for Conor would be 155. And think of the fights that he could have in that division. That for me is the strongest. You look at the top 15, they are all killers. And you could line up any of them and put them in a fight with Conor McGregor. They will sell. They will be exciting. They will pose him different challenges that he maybe hasn't dealt with before. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. Tony Ferguson versus Conor McGregor. You know, there's a huge list of superstar fighters in that division. And that for me is the natural home for him. Put him in there. Give him the title shot. If he wins that world title, you have got a string of elite level challenges just waiting. And then you've got a guy in a position who can really maybe cement his legacy as one of the greatest fighters of all time.
And just to add to that, we did see McGregor obviously staying there till the very end, but at 170, you did see him tiring throughout the fight. It's not like he came out a fresh man. Yes, it was a 5-round fight, but he was getting tired in the 3rd round. I think part of it, a lot of it is, of course, Diaz's style, but even when he was having a lot of success, he was still tiring, and I think a lot of it is the excess weight, the unnecessary weight he's holding on to, fighting at around, the 168 range. If he could drop down to 155, have a little bit of a weight cut, he's not killing himself to get to 145, but he's carrying a lot less weight, I think he could be having the best performances. He's light, he's fast, he's agile, and I think he could improve his cardio.
All right, guys, we're going to be wrapping up in just a minute, but Conor McGregor said he's got some big things in the pipeline. Now, I love to throw these crazy scenarios out there, but GSP, he's coming back in Toronto. I want to go to both of you guys. Do you think there's any chance McGregor is secretly hoping to fight GSP sometime in 2016?
There is no bigger money fight for Conor McGregor in the UFC than Conor McGregor versus GSP. GSP was the biggest draw in the UFC until Brock Lesnar came along. There's no way Brock Lesnar is going to be fighting unless McGregor decides to hop over to the WWE and do something for WrestleMania. Don't rule that out, by the way. But in terms of proper legitimate combat sport, then I think GSP is the biggest potential in terms of making the most amount of dollars. But as a spectacle, it would be awesome. The thing that I would love to see, and it's the one thing that McGregor hasn't got yet, is a big fight back home in Ireland. He built his name in Ireland. He's got, as we know, one of the most passionate fan bases anywhere in sport, really. And the unfortunate situation with Ireland is they've only got a 9,000 seat arena. But wouldn't it be amazing to bring him back to Ireland, have a stadium or an arena just full of the green, white and gold? Even if it is just the 9,000 seats, just bump the ticket prices up. 9,000 seats. And get McGregor in there fighting on home soil, and he could be fighting a cleaning lady. It'd be fantastic. But GSP would be the #1 fight. GSP would like that fight as well.
Pipelines, they can be nice. Kacper, GSP, do you think it's possible? 2016. Does Conor McGregor in the back of his mind, knowing that GSP has some options, is hoping he goes back to the drawing board? There's new owners here at the UFC. They're big into entertainment. They know what this fight could do. Is he going to try and sell, possibly with a PowerPoint presentation, with all bullet points, pointing out exactly why this fight would be so big? Is he going to try and get GSP?
If he needs some help with some slides, I'm a PowerPoint whiz, I can help him with some great sound effects and transitions. It might explain why his attitude is the way it is towards this Aldo rematch. Aldo, GSP, Toronto's happening in December. GSP recently notified USADA that he's coming back and needs 4 months. It's not going to happen in November. December, I think 8th is the earliest time GSP can possibly fight back. That would make a lot of sense. We spoke about this on the show recently. GSP is one of the most proven draws. I think the number is either 5 or 8. The top 5 or 8 pay-per-views in the UFC's pay-per-view history, GSP has been on that card. If not main event, the co-main event. Of course, I'm talking about UFC 100. So it's a proven draw. The fact that he would be returning would be spectacle as it is. All the fans, GSP, much like Conor McGregor, could fight anybody on his return, and on his return, it'd be a massive event. If he does fight Conor McGregor, I think you definitely do it in Toronto. GSP's, I guess Montreal is GSP's hometown, but whatever, do it in Canada. And to your point, Simon, as great as it would be seeing him fight in Ireland, I think it's one of those things, and the Irish fans may hate me, it's not so much that it can wait, but I think you can do that anytime. You can do that after GSP. You can do that, 2 fights down. And I'm sure that the Irish fans will be anxious about that. But you look here in Las Vegas, we were in the press box looking down at the whole arena. Most of the shirts are either green, white, or gold. It was an amazing thing to see. So I think if the time is right, and if both men are willing and able to do it, do the GSP fight. It is, as we say on Submission Radio, a big fuck-off super fight.
And just quickly on that, I think GSP would go for this fight as well because there's just not that much on the line. It's not a title, it's a super fight, and I think he knows this is a fight that he can win. And Conor McGregor, knowing that GSP might try and take him down and wrestle him, still knows this is a huge payday. And if he loses, well, then he loses to one of the best of all time. Guys, before we wrap this up, just want to get your moments. We had a lot of fun moments. Obviously, Shuffleboard King over here, I believe I beat you. But when you guys teamed up, you were number one tag team here in Vegas when it came to Shuffleboard. A lot of fun moments. We hung out, we've had drinks, we've gotten to know each other even better. But give me your favorite moment. It could be a press conference. It could be just one of the fun times like this where we're just hanging out, kicking back. I want to get your favorite moment from this trip.
It's got to be the weigh-ins. It's got to be the weigh-ins. I mean, to be in that vast ballroom with all those fans going completely mental was just something special. I mean, I remember my first ever trip to Vegas to cover the UFC was UFC 189. And we were in the MGM Grand Garden Arena for the weigh-ins, and 11,000 people piled into that building to watch the weigh-ins. I never thought I would experience anything like that again. This was a completely different feel because it was a dead flat arena. But it was awesome. It was awesome. It had scale, it had passion, it had energy, and for me, that was a real highlight. And to walk away from that, and nothing really bad happened. It was a great thing, and I walked away from that, and I thought, this sport's fantastic. We got these elite athletes getting in there and fighting tooth and nail in like the purest combat sport there is in the world. And the fans are roaring them on, imploring them to do harm to the other guy. But at the same time, there's that level of respect there. And the fans behaved themselves impeccably. We got an amazing atmosphere, and it contributed to the event. Without those fans, this week would not have been as good as it was. So for me, the fans are probably the number one thing I would take away from this.
So the weigh-ins, and of course being on Submission Radio, the highlights for Simon from this trip. No comments needed. Kacper, we all know that there's been some amazing moments here in terms of media schedules, but the listeners love Submission Radio because of some of the quips, some of the stuff that we talk about in terms of trips. You, me, and Justin, who's behind the camera right now, we had some fun moments here in Vegas. Went to Wahlburgers. The waitress called us a number of names. It was great because she was just playing ball with us. You took some photos with some interesting people on the street. Your favorite moment so far from this trip, Submission Radio as a group, outside the media schedule?
I think that moment's probably going to be tomorrow when we go to New York, we ride the roller coaster. My only wish was that we did it at nighttime. Who knows, maybe we'll go tonight. Maybe Simon, if you're down, we'll go ride the roller coaster. Maybe it'll come unhinged, and that'll be the end of all of us. What a way to go out. I will say, you asked about some of the outer, UFC press moments. My favorite moment, Simon, the weigh-ins were insane. Just the Irish crowd, something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be such a highlight from a mundane event like weigh-ins. I got to say the water bottle throwing incident, that was probably one of my favorite parts, just because it was an ordinary press conference like any other. Yeah, you had McGregor and Nate Diaz, so it was special in on itself, but it was like a car wreck. It's like when you're up at 3 a.m. in the morning and you hear the screech of tires and you're like, oh man, I hope no one's hurt. But then in the back of your mind, you're like, what if there's a cool car crash and I can go out and I can watch it and I can sit around with people? And that's obviously Dane Cook right there. But it was kind of like that. You see the Diaz brothers get up, you see it's starting, and you're like, oh my God, I'm here, I'm a part of this. This is a special moment that everybody's going to remember. It's like, who wouldn't, as an MMA fan, want to be there when John Jones and Daniel Cormier had that brawl? And we got to be there. So that was a special moment, something I'll always remember, much like being around the crazy Irish fans at the weigh-ins. That's another highlight right there.
Well, the Irish fans were great. That was a great moment as well for me. But of course, have to mention Med Dwight Howard, big fan of Submission Radio, recognized me, asked for a photo, thought about it, and then I obliged. Anyway, guys, that's Submission Radio there from UFC 202. Make sure to jump onto our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Submission Radio AU. There's some fun stuff coming out. Make sure to subscribe. And Simon, so many great things coming out from you. Let the people know about this new podcast that you've got coming out, and also some of the stuff they need to be checking out from your coverage from this event.
Yeah, appreciate that. We've got a new podcast called The Brit Pack. It's me and Shamat Karsandu, another UK journalist. just covering the sport with a British angle. So one of the things we did today is just me, so running around talking to as many international media members as we can, but we just give a bit of a British take, something a bit different, much like yourselves, giving an Australian take. So we're doing that. That comes out every Monday. Check that out on iTunes, Stitcher, Acast and SoundCloud. For me, follow me on Twitter @SimonHead. I'm churning stuff out as often as I can. I've got a newspaper column in the Sun newspaper in England every Monday. I write on a website every day, and I'm always on Twitter. So if anyone wants to hit me up, send me any messages, please feel free to do so. I love talking fights, as you know.
Well, there you go. Simon Head's going to have a lot of new, interesting messages, hopefully positive after this breakdown when he goes and checks back in. But that's it from us, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.